Hello and welcome to our 20-second podcast. I'm Linda and here is Mike.
Hi, Linda. Welcome, everyone. In this podcast series, we are exploring social threefolding by reading and discussing the original 1919 basic book by Rudolf Steiner, The Core Points of the Social Question. In this podcast, we will finish Chapter 2, Realistic Attempts at Solutions, about the principles and theory of social threefolding. So this chapter began with a comparison of the threefold social organism to the threefold human organism. And then we turn to the urgent need to separate state and economy. And finally, we discuss the urgent need to separate the free cultural life from both of these. I would say Steiner's social threefolding ideas are really quite brilliant. But for various reasons, they just haven't found the depth of understanding and the attention they deserve. To solve some of the structural problems of our current unified society, we must develop a certain independence of mind and completely rethink many of our current ideas and assumptions. So this is really a kind of chicken and egg problem. We need new thinking in order to create a separate and autonomous cultural life. And yet this new thinking will not arise so long as our education and life of abilities remain bound to old habits of thinking tied to existing social institutions. So the free cultural life is really an essential need for society today. The right state must carve out by law sufficient leisure for people to develop an appreciation for spiritual achievements. We must not fear that such leisure will lead to chaos, alcoholism, and illiteracy, because such fears rest upon a picture of the cultural life as it currently is, rather than on one that is truly free and inspiring in ways we can hardly imagine today. Rather than being a derivative of state and economy, a genuinely free and autonomous spiritual cultural life will provide an influx of new vitality into state and economy. If vocational and law schools were autonomous and independent, then new revitalizing and enlivening forces could flow into branches of government and industry. Today, much political and workplace antagonism continues on as a remnant of old class distinctions between managerial and working classes. However, if we imagine a new ownership framework where management is based on competence rather than wealth or status, and where there was a genuine recognition of the abilities of a well-educated workforce, much of the tension that exists in the workplace would disappear. And under the new labor framework, there would be an alignment of interests and incentives among all contributing parties, and this would bring about a positive transformation of our everyday life. And then, out of a clear recognition for the value of such an independent cultural life, people would gladly hand over a portion of economic proceeds in support of education and culture, because this is what makes all other achievements possible. Those whose cultural achievements are recognized by others will be able to count on this support, while those who cannot find suitable recognition will have to turn to other avenues for gainful income within the right state or the economic life. Okay, so does that ring a bell and bring us up
Yes.
to speed?
Yes, thank you, Mike.
Did you
Definitely.
did you have anything that you wanted to discuss before we go on?
Nope, I'm good to go.
Okay, so let's switch over to the screen share then.
Mhm,
So we had left off at the bottom of page 67. We had read this little paragraph, technical ideas, and I'll
mhm.
just recap that paragraph, okay?
Okay. Mhm,
So a symbiosis will arise between the two poles of physical worker and spiritual worker. And by spiritual worker, he means people that work in more intellectually and creatively. So these two poles, physical worker and spiritual worker, will provide what the other needs. The rights life will regulate the balance between these two poles based on a free understanding of these reciprocal needs. Funding for the rights life itself, for what society deems to be rights, will come from taxation in a way that harmonizes the demands of rights consciousness with the demands of economic life. So, not in this book, but in Lecture 2 of The Social Future, Collected Works 332A, Steiner speaks about abolishing all taxes and reducing the entire tax system down to a single expenditure or sales tax levied on goods and services at the point of sale. He justifies this idea by pointing out that money we receive or hold is really only an abstraction. Money only ceases to be an abstraction the moment it is exchanged for a real economic good or service. It makes little sense to tax an abstraction, that is, to tax income, wealth, corporations, property, or imports. It only really makes sense to tax expenditures. Think of how different life would be if we didn't have to worry at all about income taxes and all the different nuances and tax breaks for this or that, and instead if we only paid a single tax at the point of sale. Then tax money would be collected by the economic life and then pipelined directly to where it is needed, to education, medical and care services, police and emergency services, infrastructure, as well as the government. The allocations would be decided together by the leaders of the economic life and the rights life, who would have input on what is needed by the cultural area, by the rights state, and for infrastructure and other amenities managed by the economic life. Instead of our taxes disappearing into a political fog of vague fiscal and monetary policies, there would be transparency about tax funding that would most likely help us feel more willing to support what needs to be supported. Which is to say, everything that the rights life considers a right, whether education, medical and care services, media, housing, standard of living and unemployment supplements, government functions, and public infrastructure, to the extent these are rights, then they would be funded through taxes. However, these taxes would be collected by the economic life and passed directly to where it is needed by previous agreement without ever becoming pooled into a government treasury that politicians then mete out again using their infamous leaky buckets. Steiner's suggestion of an expenditure tax would make the whole tax system much more clean, transparent, and fair. So this imagination of the interaction of economy, right state, and a free and independent cultural life requires us to completely rethink our current mental picture of society. Does that ring a bell?
Yes, it does. Thank you, Mike.
Okay. So did you have any other comments about that last paragraph?
No, I mean, it really seems quite hopeful. I mean, I'm definitely a person who absolutely understands we can't have a country or a world without some kind of solution to collecting monies for the whole of society. So we need to have a tax system. And I think even thinking about it, like the amount of time and effort that would be freed and the complications. I mean, just look, if you're going to use a service, you're going to use a product that the government can tax on that and collect, and it being a transparent understanding and the negotiations between the rights and understanding that, okay, we need to have this kind of infrastructure, this kind of service provided for the communities, then, it's like, of course, people would be much more willing and if they knew where that money was going to be going and like you said not have a leaky bucket system. So yes, i I'm very interested in having an understanding of how this might come about, hopefully, but yeah, I'm looking forward to the rest of this chapter.
Yeah, so one picture might be of the expenditure tax is, let's say you go to the baker and you order I don't know, like a dozen cookies or something, right? And
Hmm.
and normally the way it works is you get your income is taxed, and then whatever's left over, you buy the cookies. But
Hmm.
imagine you had a world where the expenditure is taxed. It's kind of like if you can imagine, I buy 12 cookies,
Hmm.
but I only receive maybe eight. So I pay
Hmm.
for 12, but I get eight in my hand.
Hmm.
And the other four, imagine the baker sets them aside
Hmm.
for teachers, people who are unemployed, children and seniors, and they sort of set aside those cookies. So it's not so much the money. Like we always think of tax being money. If you think of it at the point of expenditure, it's actually goods that I pay for, say 12, but I receive eight of those, and
Hmm.
four of them go to other people.
Hmm. Hmm.
So it's a different picture. It's a more concrete picture
Hmm.
than this abstract idea of just taxing money.
Hmm.
That help?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and definitely, I know the difference that it makes when, because I've done this myself, where I have paid a farmer for their goods they provided, and they said, for instance, this particular good, part of the profit is going to their child's college fund. It made me so happy. I was like, absolutely. Can I pay more to that? So that goodwill, if
Mhm.
one can have the opportunity, if one is fortunate enough to have some sort of ability, when it becomes person to person almost. I don't know if that's the system that you're talking about, but in example, you're saying this. It feels so much better when we feel that we are actually making a slight difference to a real person. That thing that you just said reminded me of that. So I don't know. Um,
Yeah, that's not exactly what I meant. What I meant was it's not so much that the people, in your case, the college fund, the college professors don't need money. What they need are carrots to eat.
mhm,
And so if you imagine, it's not the farmer giving them money. Imagine the farmer giving them some of the carrots,
mhm,
because you can't eat money. Money is an abstraction. And
right.
the idea is you're buying you're buying, let's say, a dozen carrots, but you only get, say, eight of them, and then four of
Mhm,
them go to the college professors.
right.
And so in that way, you are supporting the education of this young person, or young, could be a bunch of people. But the point is, it's an economic concept, not a money or financial concept.
So are you saying that it literally will be like that, or you're just giving the idea of it that the
So,
4 carats will go?
because when you give money to the college professors, they're going to use it to buy stuff.
Hmm.
This is the point, is
Hmm.
they are then going to turn around and spend it on something they need.
Right.
So you're not giving them money, you're giving them shoes and carrots and bicycles or whatever they need.
Is you're not saying that I'm going to, because I'm buying the carrots, that this professor will get carrots, even though they want cabbage instead. There, it's not about free choice being taken away. It's about you're just bringing, yeah, go ahead.
What I mean is, money is an abstraction until it is
Hmm.
used to buy something.
Hmm.
So when you tax at the point of sale, it is money you are taxing, yes.
Hmm.
But the money that goes to, say, the teacher is then used to buy something. Now, I'm not saying that they're going to buy the exact carrots from the exact vendor. That's silly.
All right.
I'm saying they're going to use that money to buy something they need, whatever that is.
Yes.
It could be cabbage.
Hmm.
But whatever it is they buy is a real thing.
Hmm.
And so you can imagine in your mind that we are not taxing an abstraction, but we're it's a reproportioning of a real thing,
Got it. Okay.
right? This is the idea. Is that
Yeah.
whereas if you're taxing income, the way it works now, the government will pass a budget bill and they will just create money. They'll spend it on everything and anything, but this money doesn't relate to any particular goods.
Hmm.
It goes into the economy and then is used to purchase goods, and then the income is taxed, and then that money returns to the government, and it's all a kind of abstraction,
Hmm.
right? And what I'm talking about is taking away the abstract element and thinking of it in terms of goods.
Hmm. Yes. Yeah. There's a level of, I mean, that's coming up for me where the government is printing money, as they see fit, or as the whatever whoever decides the money system needs more money, and then thus creates inflation, and there's a inflation tax that happens. What would happen to inflation in this system?
So the way it works now, the government literally causes money to be created through bookkeeping transactions. And
Hmm.
it's slightly different depending on what country we're speaking of. But essentially the process is the government wants more money. They cause money to be created. The money they create, they can then spend on what's called fiscal policy, which is what the government spends money on. And then this money goes out into the world. And this exactly creates inflation. So to
Hmm.
counteract the inflation, they then have to tax and reduce the money supply again. And they bring the money back and they uncreate it in the same way they created it. Now, obviously, they don't always get as much back as they spend. And that
Hmm.
difference is called a deficit. And
Hmm.
it slowly creates more inflation over the years. Okay.
Hmm.
But what I'm talking about is a different system altogether
Hmm.
where the money is not created by the government at all, and that the money is created in a different way by the economic life. And we'll speak about this in the next chapter a little bit.
Hmm.
And then the money is always connected to real things.
Hmm.
So it's not just make-believe money that the government creates for its fiscal policy. It's
Hmm.
actually connected to real production, like real carrots and real potatoes or whatever.
Hmm. Hmm.
And then this money is then passed around, and it's not a one-to-one connection like this money has a potato connected to it. It's more like you can use this money to buy real goods, and those goods, once they're purchased, will cause the money to vanish again.
Okay.
And it doesn't
Ah,
have anything to do with the government.
okay.
So it's not based on a fiscal policy concept. It's based on an economic concept.
Okay.
And I talk about this in my book, Money for a Threefold Society.
Okay. I think this is, again, for a layperson who doesn't have the economics degree, um, there's a certain level of understanding, certainly, that I have. Um, and beyond that, I'm not quite sure of how, I sort of have general concepts. But what you're discussing is the money disappearing. So if there isn't a good, if there is like if there is a yield of some sort, whether it's through production, manufacturing, or farming, or whatever method, or if there's a service, then automatically that there is money. Where does that money come from? If we're day zero, like let's just say day zero, how does
So
this
it,
happen?
it, it's a very complicated question you're asking, but imagine it was like this, just as a first round of imagination, that a farmer would go to a community bank and say, I'm planning to produce vegetables that I can sell in the fall. But
Mhm.
now I need money to hire people to plant seeds and I need credit right now. So they could go to this community bank. The community would then give them money, not the government. Okay. And then the community would give them a loan, as it were, a credit. They could then spend this money. The money would circulate all year long amongst the people. It's not the government that spends it into existence. It's the farmer that spends it into existence. And they pay their workers. The workers then can buy other things from other people, and the money just circulates around.
Got it.
And then at the end of the fall, when the produce is ready to be sold, then the farmer can sell their produce, get the community money back, and repay their loan, and the money vanishes again.
Hmm.
And it occurs exactly in connection to the creation, the production, and consumption of goods in parallel, not one to one, but at the same time, it has zero to do with the government.
Okay. I can see that there's a lot more to it, but thank you for sharing that. I think that brings it a little bit closer to my understanding.
Yeah, yeah, it's a 1,000 times more complex than that, but
Yes.
that's just a first picture of the
Yes.
idea.
Thank you.
And so the tax would happen when things are purchased. And so a little bits of that community money would be set aside through every purchase, and that money would kind of get recycled into for the teachers and everything that has to do with the rights life.
Hmm. Hmm.
So in the economic process, the tax system would cause money to be set aside
Okay.
for the rights life.
Hmm. Hmm.
And it's completely different than what we do today with the government
Right.
printing it, all the money.
Okay. Yeah. The government gets all the money. They look at whatever their fiscal policies are and then siphon it off and have a bit of a leak at each
Yeah,
siphoning.
exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
There's no leak here. There's no
Right.
way to leak it because ultimately the farmer has to pay the loan back, not the government.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
and the accountability is directly between the community and the farmer.
Hmm. Right.
There's no vague, I don't know who's responsible for this.
Right. Right. I wonder, when you say this, I kind of wonder if they've made the system currently vague on purpose. Who knows? Yeah.
Absolutely. It's the system is based on how to finance wars.
Oh.
And the way to finance a war is you can print money to pay for your own wars this way. Every country has the power to start a war and to fund itself
Hmm.
through the inflation and the future debt of their nation. And this is what happened in World War One. When Germany lost, they were in the Treaty of Versailles were forced to pay reparation payments. So they were forced to give France and England coal and other kinds of minerals and produce, lumber, as a payment for the damage they caused in during the war. And
Hmm.
so this is how the countries finance their wars by creating money and then hopefully suing the other country to pay for damages and get their money back, right? And so I just think our current money system creates wars. It's
Wow.
it's a way to allow governments to wage wars. And if we had instead of community money, it would be impossible really to wage wars unless all the people wanted this.
Okay, so you just kind of identified for me who would not want to have this new money system.
Yeah.
And those are pretty powerful people, I might add.
And
Oh.
and so social threefolding won't come about when we say, pretty please, government, can you change yourself? Because it will never happen. We have to
Mhm.
understand this
Mhm.
realistically,
Mhm.
that governments have no interest, the economic powers have no interest in social threefolding. This
Mhm.
has to come out of a grassroots people's movement.
Mhm.
It has to.
Mhm.
And I think it's urgently necessary.
Mhm. Mhm. Absolutely. I mean, this actually, I may be wrong about this, but I think at least in part may be the reason why it hasn't been taken up because it's not efficient for causing wars or creating wars.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And Steiner
Wow.
originally proposed it during World War One in 1917 as a peace initiative. It is fundamentally a peace initiative.
Hmm.
Not that it will
Wow.
prevent wars from happening.
Sure.
It's
Yeah.
possible for a community to come together and fundraise for a defense against an attacker,
Right.
but it will be less easy for politicians to just arbitrarily decide to wage a war.
Okay.
And because now they have all the power of the money system to make that happen.
Mm.
In the future, they would have to ask people for permission to create money to fund a war. And so
Mhm.
everyone would have to be on side with this.
Right.
And
Wow.
and so the monarchical power of the president or prime minister or whoever it is we're talking about will fade away. And
Hmm.
this is something that the old forces don't want to happen.
Hmm. 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 That makes sense.
And we spoke about this as the ruling classes.
hmm hmm Yeah. And this kind of angle of it really drove it in deeper as an understanding. Okay, well, yeah, if it's, the money system is already built for, and I do remember that somebody somewhere said a lot of people are claiming that taxes were only to be temporary measures and then they would go to no taxation, whatever the system was before, but that never happened. It seems like government, likes that.
Well, the system
Yeah.
before income tax was based on property tax and tariffs.
hmm
And so it was really a tax on the wealthy, and it was a kind of import tax that allowed for nation building.
hmm
And the switch to income tax came through the war funding. And as you said, it was supposedly temporary, but then they thought it was fine if we tax the income of everyone.
hmm
Today, we can tax the income because the ordinary person is relatively wealthier.
hmm
Before World War One, in the 19th century and so on, most people had nothing really to tax.
hmm
The the poverty levels were so high
hmm
that it wasn't worth taxing income.
hmm
And it's a testament to our ability to become more wealthy that we can now tax income. But
Right.
I think what it does is create a power structure that we have to review.
Yes. Case in point. Absolutely. Yeah. Very, very good. Thank you, Mike. I really appreciate your taking the time to explain this to me.
So I'll just say these are more my personal opinions. They're not really
Mhm,
Steiner-based opinions, but I think it is fair to say that Steiner did believe that social threefolding was a peace initiative. He did believe that money should not have anything to do with the government, that it should be a community-based or economy-based system. Those are things he certainly believed.
mhm, mhm. Okay.
So I don't want to put words in Steiner's mouth, but
I know you're very true to Steiner.
I
That
tried.
I really appreciate. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay, so let's move on. We're now going to switch to the last two pages or so of the last three pages of the
hmm
chapter. And this is the wrap up now. So this paragraph that begins on page 68, in addition to,
hmm
I'll just warm it up by saying that the evolutionary forces of modern humanity point toward the restructuring of society into three independent members. This restructuring was not called for in the past because social life was guided by instinctive forces. But now something is waking up, so to speak. Today, we demand a conscious engagement with the social organism. And this consciousness will only be healthy if behavior and life are oriented from three sides. We strive for this three-sided orientation out of subconscious depths. What manifests outwardly today as social unrest is merely a clouded reflection of this striving. Okay, if you could read that, please.
Sure. In addition to the political and economic areas, the self-sufficient cultural area must be effective within a healthy social organism. The evolutionary forces of modern humanity point in the direction of the threefolding of this social organism. As long as social life essentially allowed itself to be guided by the instinctive forces of a large part of humanity, the urge for this distinct membering did not arise. In a certain dullness of social life, there worked together what basically always originated from three sources. The modern period demands a conscious engagement of people with the social organism. This consciousness can only give a healthy shape to people's behavior and their whole lives if it is oriented from three sides. Modern humanity strives after this orientation in the unconscious depths of the soul, and what plays itself out as the social movement is merely a clouded reflection of its striving.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
So I think he's saying that there's something unconscious happening that's bubbling up to the surface. And it's our task to make this conscious and then to act upon it. And this
mhm.
this subconscious element has three sides, and we've been talking about it this whole chapter, right? Does that connect to
It
your?
does. It does. Yes.
There's something deep within the human being, he's saying,
Mhm,
that isn't really something we learn in school, or it's something we feel. And
mhm,
he's trying to bring social threefolding as an articulation of this unconscious or subconscious feeling that we have.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, I definitely could not articulate it myself. I mean, this is such a complex. I mean, it's taken us, you know, 20 podcasts so far, and to get to chapter two to have an understanding to this point. So it is a complexity that I certainly would not be able to. I mean, there's definitely an unrest within my system that I can recognize just seeing how things are and how unfair and how just, the corruption and just a feeling of hopelessness for the future and how things will be for our children. And I don't know if that's what he's talking about in terms of the subconscious, foggy, cloudy sort of manifestation, but that's what I've been feeling.
I think that's exactly what he's referring to, that
Mhm,
we feel something is not right,
mhm,
but we can't articulate it. And
mhm,
and Steiner has the genius to articulate it.
mhm, mhm,
And so I think it's really worth trying to understand this.
mhm,
He says in the past, we didn't need this because everything was organized through instincts. That the way that previous cultures were organized, let's say in the medieval period, in the Roman period, in the Egyptian period, going back in time through eons of history, the human beings had to do as was directed by the different leaders and groups that were in charge of humanity.
mhm,
But now something has shifted, that we no longer feel that we want to be guided in a hierarchical way.
mhm,
And so the threefolding has to do with a fundamentally decentralized, non-hierarchical society.
mhm,
And this meets us where we are.
mhm. It's intuitive, I find, because as he's describing it, I feel into, as much as I can understand it, I can feel into it and sort of see elements of things. For instance, just looking at how the shift in the workers, when the workers and the managers and the community are in unison and have an understanding to how much each is contributing, and there's a mutual respect, and labor is not paid for like like we say, a produce or whatever,
Commodity.
commodity, thank you, then it just brings so much more respect and dignity back into the system, right? So all of this that has been spoken about so far really feels intuitive, although I could not in any shape or form even begin to articulate anything like this, but I sort of feel into the goodness of this somehow, maybe, dare I say, correctness of this.
Yeah, there's something that resonates. And
Hmm.
once we enter into it, it starts to resonate, and that's why people involved in the social threefolding world are very adamant about it, and then
Hmm.
people that don't know anything about it are confused, or they don't understand why people are so excited about it. But I think
Yeah,
it grabs you at some point.
right. Yeah,
It takes hold of, it speaks to something that's very
yeah,
deep within us.
yeah. And I really hope that this podcast and your hard work all through the decades that you've studied this can bring at least an understanding that captures the soul level of the individuals that would spend time looking at your work and looking at Steiner's work and appreciating it. And hopefully we can get at least some people starting to build that, like you say, from the grassroots up. I mean, that would be beautiful.
And I really want to emphasize the need to go back to Steiner and to really understand Steiner. There's so much that happens in the threefolding scene that is moving away from Steiner, that people didn't understand Steiner, so therefore he must be wrong. and therefore we should just make up our own things. And I
Hmm.
really think that's not a good direction. I think Steiner has a very deep insight that all we can do really is try to understand Steiner in the depth,
Right.
and then we can talk,
Hmm.
but before we've really grasped his ideas, maybe we should be a little humble,
Hmm.
I would
Hmm.
say.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not just assume he was wrong. This is not a fair assumption.
Very
Okay,
good.
let's move on to the next paragraph out of conditions. So he's
Hmm.
now going to switch to talking about the French Revolution.
Hmm.
And he says he's going to say that around the time of the French Revolution, which was the end of the 18th century, under conditions different than those of today, this same threefold striving called for the reshaping of the social organism. The words liberty, equality, and fraternity described the needed threefold restructuring. These words speak directly to the modern human soul without further need for explanation. And yet, just as thinkers of the 19th century pointed out, and he means people like Alexis de Tocqueville, John Stuart Mill, Herbert Spencer, it is impossible to realize these ideals of, I'll say, fellowship, equality, and liberty within a unitary social framework. These thinkers pointed out how the three principles necessarily contradict each other. For example, the drive for equality inherently suppresses human freedom in an absolute sense. And this is undoubtedly true, yet at the same time, we still hold out hope for the practical realization of all three social ideals simultaneously. Okay, so you could read that, please.
Sure. Out of conditions different from those in which we currently live, there emerged at the end of the 18th century, out of the deep substrates of human nature, the call for the reshaping of the social human organism. Three words were heard as a maxim for this reorganization: fraternity, equality, and liberty. Now, arguably, anyone who gets involved in the reality of human evolution with an unprejudiced mind and a healthy feeling for humanity can, of course, not help but have an understanding for all that these words indicate. Nevertheless, there were astute thinkers who, in the course of the 19th century, took pains to show how, in a unified social organism, it is impossible to realize these ideas of fellowship, equality, liberty. They recognized that these three impulses, if they were to be realized, must contradict each other within the social organism. It has been shrewdly proved how, if, for example, the impulse of equality were realized, it would then be impossible for the freedom that is necessarily justified within every human being to come into effect as well. And we cannot help but agree with those who find this contradiction, and yet at the same time, out of a general human feeling, we must have sympathy for each of these three ideals.
All right. So,
Mhm.
I would say when we look at the history since the French Revolution and the American Revolutions, and we see this original concept in French, fraternité, égalité, liberté, they have shifted a little in our times to a strong focus, I would say, on either equality or freedom or liberty. And this other word that is used here, fraternity, has kind of fallen by the wayside. Is what I mean is in our political life today, we see a lot of people marching and shaking their fists and saying we need more equality. We have other people that say we need more freedom.
Mhm.
But you rarely see people marching in the streets saying we need more fraternity, right? And somehow this third one has kind of been confused, and there's something about this happened.
Mhm.
And maybe in the two-party system, especially in the United States, I would say, I don't want to oversimplify, but the Democratic Party leans very strongly into the equality principle. The Republican Party leans more into the liberty principle. And this third element is left out, this other thing. And so I wanted to just speak about this a little bit because the word fraternity literally means brotherhood. So
Hmm.
so being brothers, and what does that really mean? On the one hand, we look at it today, it's a bit of a sexist term. And so I've, in my translation, replaced it by fellowship. I think fellowship is a word that could replace this notion of fraternity because it's when we say our fellow human being, like helping our fellow human being, what we're referring to is a kind of fraternity without it being a fraternity. You know what I mean?
Hmm. Yes, yes.
And so, to me, fellowship doesn't mean sitting around and having a good time. It refers to me to mean serving the needs of our fellow human being,
Hmm.
not because they are anything but a fellow human being. This
Hmm.
is the only requirement. They should have their needs met for no reason other than the fact that they are a fellow human being.
Hmm.
And so our task is to help other people. And this is a third independent task, unrelated to equality, unrelated to liberty.
Hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah.
So I mean something like economic fellowship, really.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
so serving the needs of another. So
Hmm.
when one person produces carrots and another person produces shoes, they're not producing these for themselves, they're producing these for their fellow human beings.
Hmm.
And that's the quality we're speaking of. It's an economic principle.
Hmm.
And
Well, I would also, you're absolutely right for me, in just the context of what we're talking about, which is bringing about a new system. But the fellowship angle, in a spiritual sense, keeping in mind the other person. Also, I think it's not just economic. I think it's like this understanding that if I'm actually helping a fellow human, in whatever way, shape, or form, that it is the highest cause, good, whatever that we can possibly do. We're all serving each other. We're all here to serve each other, whether we realize it or not.
that's right. Exactly. That's what I mean. It's a principle of social life
Hmm.
and but it can be realized through the economic life, is what I'm saying.
Hmm.
So we can't really realize it through the rights life
Hmm.
because the rights life has to do with fairness.
Hmm.
And we can't realize it through the cultural life because the cultural life has to do with liberty or freedom.
Hmm.
And it's really through the economic life that we realize fellowship. So, for
Hmm.
instance, the economic life is not just about physical goods. It can be any kind of services, like as a psychotherapist, you are providing psychotherapy services,
Hmm.
and that is a form of fellowship. That's an
Hmm.
economic principle.
Hmm.
You're not doing this out of a rights principle or a freedom principle. You're doing it out of
Hmm.
a fellowship principle.
Hmm.
It's an economic concept, I would
Hmm.
say. So
Hmm.
these three have to do with the economic life, fellowship, equality or fairness has to do with the rights life, and liberty or freedom or inner freedom has to do with the cultural life.
Right.
And so he's saying the French Revolution already hundreds of years ago had identified these three qualities, but then some of these sort of come into being. More the equality and liberty has happened, but this third one hasn't really happened.
Hmm. Yeah.
And this is why our society is still not coherent. It's kind of falling apart because
Right.
we don't really care about the needs of others.
Right. Well, I think on a individual basis, on maybe community organizational basis, maybe it's coming out in that way, but not in a purely sort of cohesive, organized system as Steiner is proposing. Yeah.
Yeah, we of course do always care for our friends,
Hmm.
but on a social level is what I mean, on a
Hmm.
societal level,
Yeah.
we're not really that interested in the people we don't like. We're
Mm.
not interested in helping them.
Hmm.
Whereas in the economic life, if we make carrots or shoes, if someone walks into the store and buys them, we don't ask them for their political affiliation or their worldview or their religion. We
I
just
hope
say,
not.
have you
Yeah.
got enough money to pay for this? Right?
Hmm.
So we're serving their needs independently of their politics, independently of their philosophy or religion or anything like this. This is
Hmm.
the economic life is not about those things,
Hmm.
you see.
Yeah.
My belief is that if we want to build a cohesive, coherent coming together of society, we need to focus on this economic life.
Hmm. Hmm.
Not in order to make money, but in order to develop this quality of serving our fellow human being. This is what is really lacking.
This is very interesting because I think people who do tend to care about people might say, oh, I think it was a really important thing that you just said, not to make money, but to really genuinely, to have this underlying consciousness about this, about kindness and caring about people we don't know just in general, right? And it is the fundamental avenue you're saying, which I hadn't seen before, hadn't realized before, is the through the economic section. Yeah.
Yeah, and I want to be clear, I'm not talking about a moralistic thing. I'm
Mm.
I'm talking about building institutions, economic institutions that allow us to naturally have the incentive to help each other.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, for example, the division of labor is a classical example.
Hmm.
I don't produce my own shoes. I buy them from someone who makes shoes. And so I produce something. In my case, I'm a teacher. I provide teaching services, and in exchange, I receive shoes using money as a means of exchange. It's not that the money is not the important thing. The money, I get money so I can buy shoes with them. I get the
Hmm.
shoes is the main concept here. So I
Yeah,
teach in order to have shoes. And
right.
and that is where the shoemaker is serving my needs, and maybe I teach their child math or something, and then I serve their needs. And that's how we
Yes,
serve each other's needs.
yes.
This is the economic life. And it's completely separate from the life of equality, which is about human to human relations as equals. We're not, the shoemaker and I are not necessarily equals. We're fellows.
Hmm.
And the idea of liberty is where I'm free and the other person is free.
Hmm.
Each of us has an area of our own abilities, and I didn't tell that person to be a shoemaker. That's somebody, that's their decision based on their own abilities.
Hmm.
These are three completely separate areas.
Mm. Very cool.
Now, would you like to explore, Linda? I had some thoughts about some examples of these contradictions that they were speaking of later. Would you like to
I
talk about those briefly?
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I remember the first time that I ever heard, liberty, fraternity, and equality. I just sat there kind of thinking, well, if we did this, then I recognized at quite a young age that, okay, so if we're wanting to be free, but then how do you actually bring about this equality at the same time of bringing about freedom and at the same time feeling that we are at the time I thought brotherly because of the fraternity. But yeah, so yeah, definitely good to go into that for sure.
So he doesn't mention some of these thinkers, and I'm not going to go into 19th century thought, but I thought maybe some modern examples, even from contemporary recent events and so on,
Hmm.
of how these three principles can contradict each other. Let's take, for example, equality and liberty, which you just mentioned. I think
Hmm.
one example of this is when you talk about freedom of speech versus let's say, for example, in the United States, the First Amendment is a very strong law. It has a very strong priority, and courts consistently uphold the freedom of speech in the U.S. That it's a kind of absolute. that people can have a freedom of speech,
Mhm.
even a freedom of hate speech in the
Mhm.
US,
Mhm.
as long as it does not rise to the level of a threat.
Mhm.
And this is an example, I think, of how it contradicts on, say, university campuses, the right of a student to an equality of an educational environment that's free from discrimination and
Mhm.
harassment.
Mhm.
So we have two contradictory things here. As a student, you want to have equality, that you are not discriminated against, you're not harassed.
Mhm.
But then you have the freedom of speech element that kind of can lead to a contradiction here, you see?
Mhm. Mhm.
And so, how do you resolve this? And I don't want to take sides. I just want to point out that there is a contradiction here. And in some cases, I would say the US Americans would say, well, freedom is really important. And I'm sorry you feel harassed, but this is the cost of a free society,
Mhm.
that everyone has the right of free speech. And if you feel discriminated against, well, too bad for you.
Right.
Other countries may have a more balanced proportional relation. They will, like, for example, in Canada, certain kinds of hate speech are actually banned. You're not allowed to say certain things. And so we're trying to find in different countries different approaches to resolving this contradiction.
Mhm.
Okay? So that's
Yep.
one example. And let's take another example, the conflict between equality and fellowship. And I would say an example of this, and again, I'm not taking sides, I'm just going to mention it, the notion of affirmative action. So, on the one hand, if you think of hiring practices or student admissions, you could say these are based on a principle of equality. So, every individual should be treated equally, regardless of their background or their privilege. We would have, say, an admissions test. Depending on your score, you're admitted or you're not. But then you have affirmative action, which comes along and says, well, we have to look at our fellow human being from the perspective of their specific needs, their specific circumstances. If someone had been disadvantaged in their life, then in a way, we will help them in a fellowship principle way by giving them support they need to help them catch up. And if we don't do that, we're not treating them as a fellow human being. So if we want to support our fellow human being, we need to help them in a way that violates the equality principle. And again, I'm not taking sides. I'm just
Yep.
saying this is a contradiction.
Yep.
And we have a struggle. How do we decide these questions?
Mhm.
And I know people have views, very strong views on one side or on the other about this.
Mhm.
And then a great example of the contradiction between fellowship and liberty is the question of vaccine mandates. And
Mhm.
again, I'm not taking sides. I'm just saying the fellowship principle means I'm concerned for my fellow human being. I'm concerned about public health, the safety of everyone else, whereas liberty is more about my freedoms. And my freedom might mean harming another person or exposing them to a virus or something like this. And I don't want to get into debate about the science of this. I just want to say this is a contradiction
Mhm.
because the value of individual freedom is a principle that stands in contradiction to placing ourselves in service to the needs of our fellow human beings.
Mhm.
And in political philosophy, this latter is sometimes called the social contract dilemma. Okay. It's a very sort of famous thing because it questions how much power does the individual have and how much power does the collective have?
Mhm.
Does the individual have power over the collective, or does the collective have power over the individual? And this is the social contract idea that we contract together to work together as a society. So we give up something of our individual rights, but at the same time, the society is created through a democratic process that is based on individual choice. So there are lots of examples of this, like military conscription, taxation, environmentalism. All of these are examples of this social contract dilemma. And in
Mhm.
different situations, the same person might side with the individual pole on this one issue, and then they'll side with the community or public pole on the other issue.
Mhm.
So this is actually a tension that exists in our society at all times, in all
Mhm.
places.
Mhm.
And it's the reason why we have representative democracy, in fact, because if we had direct democracy, that means every person votes on every issue. It's like imagine a parliament with millions of people in it.
Mhm.
Then individuals would have all the power. If you had instead a small group of people that decided everything, then you would have a different structure, right? And the idea of representatives is kind of a compromise. So we elect a representative and then the representatives decide things.
Mhm.
And this tries to strike a balance between the individual pole and the community pole.
Yes. Mhm.
So basically, I just want to say that all of these principles, the fellowship, equality, liberty, they're constantly coming into conflict. And there is maybe no best answer that says
Mhm.
this is the answer.
Mhm.
And so what we need to do is rethink how we're going about this and say, okay, these three principles are interacting as a living system. Steiner always considered the threefold society to be an organism. And a healthy organism will always strive towards health and balance. But if this balance is impossible to maintain, then the organism might become ill or have disease, and it
Mhm.
could potentially die.
Mhm.
And this is true even for a social organism.
Right.
So these are not just abstract ideas, they're principles of a core tension that maintains the vitality of a truly living social organism. And just as our physical organism might be self-contradictory, like, for example, the lungs, they want to take oxygen into themselves. The heart wants to pump oxygen away from itself. And our life arises through the coexistence of these contradictions. And it's this disagreement, let's say, between the heart and the lung, is what leads to life. So we're not talking about a social mechanism. The existence of these contradictions and tensions is exactly the sign of the living quality of the social organism that we have to learn to embrace. Okay?
I like that. Very interesting.
And I think so many people go at the threefold social organism, even in the threefolding scene, with a kind of mechanistic way of thinking. They want a mechanism. They want everything to be clean and simple and not messy, and this is how
Mhm.
everything gets resolved.
Mhm.
And I think this is a big mistake. We have to think about it as an organism.
Very good. Yeah. That's a really interesting way of looking at it. I mean, you have said throughout that Steiner has talked about this as an organism, but this gives another level of understanding of how the tensions between the three and the examples really brought it home for me as well. The freedom and those real life examples
Mhm.
that we're living today,
Yes.
we understand. Yeah.
We're inside of them. We're not
Hmm.
outside of them at all. Yeah.
Yeah. Very cool.
Okay. So
Yes.
let's go on to the next paragraph. The next paragraph will almost take us to the end of the chapter and this contradictory element. So let's just have a look at this. I'll warm it up and say social threefolding is meant to be internally self-contradictory. Social threefolding is supposed to be a living reality, not something merged together into a unitary society. Each of the three members is supposed to be independent and centralized within itself. And then, through their dynamic interaction, the unity of the whole social organism can emerge. In real life, as with our natural organism, independent yet contradictory elements work together to form a higher unity. We must learn to grasp the very real life inherent to a society reshaped according to the principles of fellowship, fairness, and freedom. We will then see how associations will bring about economic fellowship, how the life of public law, if it is based purely on human-to-human relations, will bring about fairness, and how the liberated cultural life will bring about a genuine impulse for freedom. These three ideals can never be realized within a centralized society that chaotically jumbles everything together. Instead, each independent area can summon power from one of these three impulses and then can collaborate with the other areas in a fruitful way. Okay, if you could read that, please.
Sure. This contradictory element exists because the true social meaning of these three ideals only comes to light by understanding the necessary threefolding of the social organism. The three social members are not supposed to be merged and centralized within an abstract theoretical parliament or other unit. They're supposed to be a living reality. Each of the three social members should be centralized within itself, and only then, through their lively coexistence and collaboration, the unit of the whole social organism can emerge. In real life, seemingly contradictory elements do work together as a unity. Therefore, we will come to grasp the life of the social organism if we are able to comprehend the realistic shaping of this social organism with regard to fellowship, equality, and liberty. Then we will recognize how the collaboration of people within the economic life must rest upon the fellowship that arises from associations. In the second member, in the system of public law, where we have to do with the purely human relation from person to person, we have to strive for the realization of the idea of equality. And in the cultural area, which exists relatively independently within the social organism, we have to do with the realization of the impulse of freedom. Regarded in this way, these three ideals show their real value. They cannot be realized within a chaotic social life, but only in the healthy threefold social organism. No abstractly centralized social structure can realize the ideals of freedom, equality, and fellowship jumbled together, but rather each of the three members of the social organism can summon its power from one of these impulses, and then each can collaborate with the other members in a fruitful way.
Okay, thank you,
Yep.
Linda.
Mhm.
So, yeah, he's saying basically that we have to think of these three things as separate, and we can't just jumble them together.
Mhm.
And I've seen people have these initiatives in the threefolding scene where they want to create this perfect organization or something where they put all these three elements together. They have a system that is fair, that is free, and that is serving the world, all in one unit.
Mhm.
And this is not what Steiner's talking about. He's saying they have to have their own separate, independent being, and then they will then collaborate.
Mhm.
And you can't just jumble it all together. This is the mistake of social democracy, and this is the mistake that many people make today.
Mhm.
Yeah, there's no way to resolve the contradiction if there's a centralization.
Mhm. Yeah.
You have to give each thing its own voice. And then through the voices, there will be a discussion. And through the
Yes.
discussion, there will be a resolution.
Yes, this makes sense. I mean, look, it's almost like when I'm thinking about a family. If we have two people in that family and they become one, essentially, as you know, they are a family. But if each voice has a different experience, a different perception, a different ideology, ideas, and one of the voices is not heard, then there's an imbalance. So one's voice will be more clear, not saying it's a wrong voice or a right voice. It's got nothing to do with wrong or right. It's got everything to do with that both voices being heard actually brings about a new existence, a new that relationship sort of evolves and grows and becomes better as both voices are heard,
Mhm. Yeah, I think
right?
the
So,
word you may be looking for is consciousness. that it
Mm,
creates an open consciousness. And
mhm.
as long as it's held within and non-verbally kept within a certain structure, it is not brought into consciousness. And
Right.
I think what Steiner is speaking of is a way to make society more conscious.
Mhm. Yeah, you're right. Okay.
We have to do this in our times. It's an imperative
Mhm.
because otherwise we will have this unconscious compulsion that is not compatible with freedom.
Mhm. Mm.
Okay, now we're on
Yes.
the last paragraph. Let's just wrap this up. In the final paragraph, he will close it off by saying that those individuals who, at the end of the 18th century, that's the French Revolution time, as well as in later times, those individuals who were able to see the impulse for the realization of the three ideals of freedom, equality, and fellowship could sense which way the evolutionary forces of modern humanity are pointing. Unfortunately, these same individuals could not also see the need to overcome the unitary state, for which these same ideals represent something impossible. Nonetheless, they declared their support for what was in fact contradictory, because an urge toward threefolding was working within them. And today, the upheavals and discontent once again demand that these same impulses, which are pushing toward social threefolding, be made into conscious social will. So if you could read that, please.
Yep. Those people who at the end of the 18th century raised the demand for the realization of the three ideas of freedom, equality, and fellowship, as well as those who repeated them later, could dimly sense which way the evolutionary forces of modern humanity are pointing. At the same time, however, they have not thereby overcome the belief in the unitary state, for which their ideas mean something contradictory. They declared their support for what is contradictory because an urge was working in the subconscious depths of their soul life towards the threefolding of the social organism, in which the trinity of their ideas can then become a higher unity. The social facts of today, speaking so clearly, demand that the forces of evolution, which in the development of modern humanity are pushing towards this threefold structure, be made into conscious social will.
Okay. Yeah, and we see him ending the chapter on these words. Do you remember from the preliminary remarks before the first preface? He talked about goal conscious social will. And here again, he's talking about this is a very important concept.
Mm,
Conscious social will.
mhm.
And this is what it takes.
Right.
This is what threefolding is about.
This is mindfulness on a social scale,
Yeah,
basically.
yes, it's true. In lecture 4 of the Social Future lectures, that's Collected Works 332A, he speaks about how the philosophy of freedom is the basis for an expansion into threefolding as a social version of the philosophy of freedom. So, in a way,
Mhm,
our free will, if we expand it into the societal scale, it becomes social threefolding.
mhm. Very interesting. Wow, we completed the second chapter, Mike.
That's right. So congratulations. We did it. And
Yeah.
next time we will start chapter 3, which is about capitalism and labor.
Mhm.
So it's a more this is the theory chapter we just finished, and next time we'll go into the nitty-gritty.
Yes. Yeah. Sounds good.
Okay?
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks for the discussion around this. This is extraordinarily interesting. It's just, yeah, I agree with you that this is highly needed, and I'm so glad we're doing this.
Okay. Great. Okay.
All
So
right.
we'll see you next time.
See you next time.
Okay.
Take
Bye for
care.
now.
Bye.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please hit like and subscribe.